Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth.
Ableism is our ism for today, and it comes to us as one of the stranger, newer sort of categories of intersectionality. That is, it's another one of those accusations that are made of discrimination on another axis. So we have discrimination on the basis of gender, discrimination on the basis of sexual identity, discrimination on the basis of religion, or any number of things. Well, ableism is discrimination, a social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. I know, it's crazy. How do you write that and not see how crazy that is? I'm not saying that God can't bless me if he gives me some disability. I know people with all sorts of disabilities that are wonderful people and wonderfully blessed, and are certainly not less than as people. But what this means at its core is that you can't even describe something as healthier. That if you were to, just like the recent study showed that 98% of men did not want to date a transgendered person. Like this was news. I venture to guess that 98% of parents would not want their children to be born blind or deaf or unable to walk. Now, again, that doesn't mean that people who have these disabilities are less than. But it does mean that it's a hardship. And even that truth, which is denied in principle by this definition of ableism, is nevertheless affirmed even in the midst of it. Just like so many of these things, we have this great problem where we want to affirm at one and the same time that people in this discriminated group are exactly the same as those not in the discriminated group, and yet people in the discriminated group need to have special favors. We joke about the conundrum that modern men face, whether to open a door or not open a door for a female. We have people who say, well, look, if they don't want me to, I'm not going to. If they want to be the same, then I'm going to treat them like a dude. Well, with ableism, here are some things that those who are concerned about ableism would like for us to be on the lookout for. We're supposed to, for instance, not frame disability as tragic or inspirational. Okay. So if someone overcomes a hardship, that's a bad thing for us to celebrate that. We're not supposed to, on the other hand, we're not supposed to make movies that are not, that don't have audio description or closed captioning. So either everything's the same or we need to adjust. We don't want to treat anybody as less than, but we better make sure that we have accessibility high on our list for everybody. Friends, it is certainly possible to discriminate against people who have different abilities. I'm not disputing that. And I'm not even disputing that that's a bad thing. You know, I've seen it. And it can be ugly. That said, you have to be so confused, so twisted up, so distorted, so morally unable to take the view that there's something wrong with preferring health over sickness, of wanting the blind to see and the lame to walk. You understand that by the definition that these people give, Jesus himself would be guilty of ableism because he made people well. He made people well. The things that we find to take offense at, the eggshells that we have to walk on because we cultivate this victim mentality, it's not healthy for anybody. I remember just as a 7-year-old, I had a broken leg. I had a cast for 3 months. I had to miss school. Often had to be in a wheelchair. And how my face would turn red because people would look at me. Other children would look at me. Other children wouldn't play with me. Again, I get it. But I'm so glad my leg didn't stay broken. That I got better, because better is better. And ableism is hoo-ha. Having not only recorded but published our first segment in our new series that we call Forever Friends, I wanted to report to you that I was actually able to make sure that the man I wanted to praise and thank and speak well of, Ted Bell, was actually able to hear that particular podcast. I tracked him down, I sent him a link, and it turned out to be an encouragement to him, which in turn is an encouragement to me. We come now to our next forever friend, and I have to confess that this particular forever friend hasn't been an especially close friend or even an acquaintance over the past, I would say, 45 years of my life, maybe 40 years of my life. It's not that we had a falling out. We just went our separate ways. But we did, for a time, come together and share life together. His name is Greg Thomas. And right there you have something in common between us, because at the time that I met Greg Thomas, which was day one of first grade, when I met Greg Thomas, I went by my middle name. I was known as Craig. So he was Greg and I was Craig. We had this in common. We were roughly about the same size. We had this in common. We were roughly about the same skill set, at least when it came to math and when it came to sports. And there's another thing that we had in common. We both had a crush on Miss Donchez, our first grade teacher. Some of those things came together when Greg and I would find ourselves being handed our math ditto sheets, and we would kind of look across the classroom at each other and then start, and we would race to see who would be the first one to hand it in to Miss Donchez, like we were handing her a bouquet of flowers. Our sports endeavors began with kickball in the schoolyard, but got even more serious when we both played Little League for the same Little League team. But I need to go back and point out that for all of our similarities, we also had some pretty profound differences. You got to understand that Greg and I, we met, early September 1971. In July of 1971, I was living in a suburb of Cincinnati. I had lived in suburbs all of my life. I was a suburban middle-class kid. When I showed up at my first grade class, I was attending school that year and next 2 years at Cook Township Elementary School, which catered to and served a clientele that was decidedly rural. I remember when another friend, Paul Stahl, brought for show and tell a pair of turkey legs from the turkey that his father had shot. I remember that I had classmates whose homes did not have running water or electricity. I mean, this was some serious backwoods stuff. In fact, my home was on a dirt road that was called Old Distillery Road because once upon a time, a lot of the ridge runners used to make moonshine up in those hills. Well, Greg's family was a little bit more rural. But despite that difference, we really hit it off. In fact, I forgot to mention, not only do we have sports in common, but he and I were buddies in the Cub Scouts. We went to Cub Scouts together, and it was in that context that I got to spend some time at his house. He lived, probably 3 or 4 miles from my house, and sometimes his mom would drive us to Cub Scouts, sometimes my mom would, but that was some time that we got to spend together, and we were close friends. And by the way, I learned some sort of the rural speech for that area from my good friend Greg, because even though we were friends, we weren't always friends. And in fact, sometimes when we would bicker, because friends do that, he would let me know that our relationship was not one that was at peace, because he would say to me, "I'm going to cut the buddy line." And he would slice his hand through this imaginary line. He's cutting the buddy line, so we weren't going to be buddies. But then we typically make up quickly enough. He didn't call ghosts ghosts. He called them haints. He was a character and a lot of fun. So he and I were best friends in first and second and third grade before I left that particular school. And then, as I mentioned, we were on the same Little League team together, and we were sort of at, again, about the same level. We would play in some of the games together, with one of us at shortstop, one of us at second base. One of my favorite moments in the history of my Little League career was just sort of an image-based thing. It happened that I was playing shortstop and Greg was playing at second base. There was 2 outs, a runner at first. Someone hit a chopper toward me, and I was able to just take a few steps forward, field that chopper, and very casually, already running into the dugout, very casually just flip the ball underhanded to Greg at second base to end the inning. And I felt like a big leaguer because, that's how they did it. And Greg was a part of that. Now, after the end of Little League, it was probably another couple years till I was back in the government school system just for a year, and I saw Greg there, but didn't have a lot of interaction with him, and we weren't particularly close then. But the last time I saw Greg was a really poignant moment for me. I think I was a senior in college, and I had driven down from Grove City to Stallstown to just take one last look around at the place I grew up. And I'm driving down the main road, 7-Eleven, and I happened to catch a glimpse just as he was getting out of his car. It was an old car. It was a beat-up car. I saw Greg, and he was wearing coveralls like he had been, and he was looking profoundly weary. I believe he was working in some sort of car repair kind of place, and he was already beaten down. Well, I don't know what's become of Greg. And I know that with a name like Greg Thomas, tracking him down on the internet's not going to be very easy at all. But I also know this. He was a good friend. He was a good guy. And my prayer is that he is at peace and that he is doing well. How often should we celebrate the Lord's Supper? I don't think we should be surprised that in certain circles this remains an issue of dispute. It's been an issue of dispute since the Reformation. John Calvin, serving as pastor in Geneva, Switzerland, wanted the church where he served to celebrate weekly. The elders of that church, however, disagreed, and Calvin submitted to the will of his elders, as he should have. They, however, should have agreed with Calvin. There is considerable evidence, though I confess it's not overwhelming evidence, but there is considerable evidence that weekly communion was the practice of the early church. That in itself, even if we knew it was the practice, that in itself is not compelling, but it means something. My conviction, however, that the elders should have agreed with Calvin, my conviction is grounded in something else. In the joy of the celebration. At the end of the day, I really have no interest or need to answer the question as to how often we should celebrate. I am happy to affirm that we get to celebrate every week. And if we get to do so, why in the world wouldn't we? Well, there are three answers that are typically given here. The weakest of those three reasons is that the celebration is kind of a hassle. Someone has to fill those tiny cups. Someone has to clean up the spills. Someone has to set up in some way the feast, even if it comes hermetically sealed like a sea ration. That's true. But it's also true of the whole service. We don't complain that someone has to put together the order of worship or the slides with the words that we sing together. No one says, let's meet once a quarter for worship. It's such a hassle putting together the parking team and finding volunteers for the nursery. Too much hassle equals not important. But it is important. The second reason is much like, but slightly better than the first. It says that celebrating the Lord's Supper takes away time from the sermon. First, no, it doesn't. It only does so if you've already determined you have a limitation on the time you're gathering for worship. Second, even if that were the case, it could, quote, take away time from some other part of the service, like the singing. Third, why would we think protecting time for the sermon is a greater priority than saving time for the celebration of the Lord's Supper. Too much time equals less important. The best reason to not celebrate weekly, which is like being the tallest guy at a little person gathering, is that when we do so, the supper will lose its power and meaning, that it will become common. Once again, though, I'm left wondering why we don't apply the same reasoning to other parts of the service. No one says, let's have a sermon quarterly, to keep it special. We don't want to just go through the motions. Or, we should take up an offering just once a month. More often than that, and people will just give by rote without their hearts in the right place. Friends, the great blessing of communion is that we draw near to our Heavenly Father. We eat at peace at His table. A second great blessing of communion is that we draw near to our Heavenly Father and each other. The union in communion is not just me and the Father and you and the Father, but me and you. Which means, if we hunger for weekly communion and don't have it, and grumble and complain, we're the one missing the point. Love your brothers. Love your fathers. And know, however often you're able to come to the table, that your brother brought you there, and that your Father loves you.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.